Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for day 2 of the NBO Lit Fest. If you were here yesterday, thank you for coming back. If this is your day 1, I think you couldn't have chosen another better way to spend today, your Saturday. So because the conversations, if you look at the program, they're going to be really, really, really amazing. And I'm so honored to kick us off and to start this first panel. So yeah, my name is Mercy Juma. I am a correspondent for BBC, covering Africa. Most of the time, sometimes I'm in Nairobi, but most of the time I'm all over the continent. So we have 45 minutes, guys. 45 minutes to talk about, a theme that, in my opinion, I feel could be like a whole lecture, a whole university lecture. We're talking about narratives when it comes to African authors in the diaspora, And we have these couple of meetings to just challenge some of these narratives, but most important to look at why do we even have this discussion about narratives and people's origins and where they come from, and how this shapes their writing, or how the literary world perceives them. And I don't think there is any other kind of persons or authors that could help us dissect this better than you two. So thank you so much, Aminatta and Taiye. I know we've had a bit of chit-chat. So to just start us off, why are you always asked to talk about your African origins or where you come from and how this has shaped your career as writers and authors?
Hello, everybody, and I'm delighted to be back in Nairobi again. Thank you for coming this morning. Why are we always asked this question? That's a funny one, because you're asking me why people in your position are always asking us this question. So I could put it back to you, but I won't do that. Why do I think I'm always asked that question? Somebody once said to me, well, you've got a very... are you confused? Or the assumption that I was confused. Are you confused? And I said, I realise I'm confusing, but I am not confused myself. And I think that is at the heart of it. I think that people want an explanation, and they want an easy explanation, and they come with a set of presumptions about one of our countries, one of our nations, in my case, this continent, Africa. My other continent, of course, is Europe, which comes with its own set of assumptions. And they would appear to be diametrically opposed. And so we find ourselves explaining, a lot about our background and a lot about where we come from. I don't know. To me, I've been alive a long time, and I'm kind of surprised we're still sort of circling the same questions. I feel like these things, the answers I've given over and over again. But I'll say a couple of things about it. I remember when a very long time ago, I dated an American. He was a TV correspondent, and at that point, I'd only set foot in the States once when I was very young, and I lived there, and I've lived there for 9 years, and. And he said, it's, and I've never forgotten it because I live there now. He said, it's very interesting to talk to somebody whose idea of a place has been entirely created by television and film and books. And so that's really what we're thinking of. What is the idea of Africa that's been entirely created by television and film and books, and that is the idea that we've inherited, the idea that we're constantly having to describe, and the idea that we are increasingly find ourselves having to write against. It's the idea that we are in conversation with as writers.
9 years in the United States, and look how beautiful she looks. It's a triumph. So. This is what comes to me. I was on a panel with the Ethiopian-American novelist Maza Mangiste, and she said she's often asked, does she feel more Ethiopian or more American? And I remember she said, that's like asking, am I my father's child or my mother's child. I'm obviously the child of them both. I was struck by her answer, but then I started thinking a bit more. We have lots of time to think about this question, obviously, because we can never escape it, no matter how quickly we run. And we both did track and field. We can run, but we can't outrun this question. And then I thought, okay, but if we're honest, to be an African in the diaspora is not as neutral as being an Irish person in the diaspora, for example, because Africans are in diaspora to places that have been hostile to Africa. So if you set out from Nigeria and you end up in the United States of America, which is no bastion of safety for a brown-skinned person, or if you end up in England, you are in many ways moving from home to the enemy camp. In the broadest historical sense, it's not the same as moving from Nigeria to Ghana, as my mum has done. So there is a slight edge, if I think about it. There's always been a slight edge to the question for me. You were born in, and I love when questioners ask, they always state facts to me. They're like, you were born in England, as if I don't know. You were raised in the United States, as if this is news, as if this was the result of an investigation. It's like true.
I'm so glad I didn't start there.
I love it. So you were born in the UK and you were raised in the US and your parents are from Ghana and Nigeria. It's also scandalous. And what do you feel? And I realized, yeah, there is kind of a tone of, are you playing for the home team or the away team? Where really do your loyalties lie? Who can we really expect you to be? Where can we place you, lazily and simplistically? But also, can we really trust you? Are you one of us? And I think that question, are you one of us, is a primal human question. It's just that for a very long time, it was easy for people to answer. Yes, I am. No, I'm not. And as soon as you got into the business of making hybrid humans, hybridity on any grounds, that question became difficult to answer. But it's a primal one. It's a survivalist one. Are you for me or against me? And so I think I've come to understand that I, too, am confusing. I am no longer confused, but for a long time I was, because I felt I'm for everybody, and nobody really likes anyone who's for everybody. It's a little bit too wishy-washy for the primal tribal human being. But what it's good for, it turns out, is writing. It's a fantastic thing to be a hybrid, confusing, and or for a time confused human if you want to tell human stories. Because it means you can always access the liminal space. You can always get in there in the cracks between everything, and they're everywhere. There are cracks everywhere. Nobody knows fully if they are for or against themselves, much less anything else. But nobody wants to admit that. It's much easier and it's much safer to proceed on the grounds that if you are one of mine, I'll know it. And you can tell me so, and you can tell me if you're not. And I've never been able to do that for anybody. I cannot convincingly tell any Ghanaian, Nigerian, American, or Brit that I'm one of them. And I love that because it makes me a better
writer. It's unwinnable. If you claim to be on their team, they'll point out all the reasons that you're not really.
Why you notes?
My accent changes every vowel sound. Whose team am I playing for? Nobody believes me. They're like, oh, really? You're British? Really? Because you don't say or like you're from England. Okay, you're American? You say water. Like it's and you should hear me speak Yoruba. It's a shame. But I love it. I've come to really love it because it just means I really play for team humanity.
Yeah.
I really, really do. And if I go back to myself as an early writer, 4, 5, 6 years old, when my subjects were unicorns and mermaids and, African warrior princesses of my own creation, all I cared about there was the inside of my characters. And it's still true, as wildly dissatisfying and kumbaya as that sounds. That's still the team that I'm playing for.
I've heard hybrid people described as amphibians, and I like that, right? As at home as in water as on land.
Yeah. But what do you do when the war comes between the land people and the water people?
She's either. Anyway, when you talk about being for everyone.
No. I am not from Cape Town. I am not from everywhere. Listen,
No.
I'm not from everywhere.
Because this is leading up to a question, you know, because you know, there is an expectation about African authors or authors of African descent or authors who have origins from Africa, basically. And the expectation has been you need to write about people that look like you or about you, right? You need to write about people that look like you or you yourself. How do you break from this pigeonhole that you've been put in, and even as you start writing about other people, you know, the Yugoslavian man or wherever, in a way that is not biased? And number two barrier, how do you make this acceptable? Do you feel like you have the burden of making this acceptable to the publishers because of the stereotype that they have about you or the narrative that they have about you as a writer of African descent?
I don't really take on burdens, actually.
That's why you look so young.
You know, I write what pleases me, and I write what I'm interested in. And so I came to write, for those of you who don't know, I published several books that were set in Sierra Leone. First one was a memoir, so quite clearly about me and my family. And then I wrote a couple of novels set in Sierra Leone. And then I became very interested in the civil conflict that had taken place in Yugoslavia, for the reason that it was a contemporaneous war, exactly contemporaneous to the Sierra Leonean civil conflict. And I had friends who'd been caught up in the Yugoslav civil conflict. And the story was very much the same, right? You know, these wars had got a very, very similar basis. And no journalist on earth seemed to be capable of seeing that, because one was being fought by white people in Europe and one was being fought by black people in Sierra Leone. And no, you know, this escaped every correspondent on earth. But I could see the exact similarities, and also the countries were extraordinarily similar, right? So both countries had had a dictatorship, or both countries which had been followed for 25 years, which had been followed by a massive economic decline, and then this had tipped the countries into civil conflict. One civil conflict had kicked off really quickly, one really slowly. And that interested me. But the countries were very similar. They were the same size. They had the same size population. They were both rural. The economies were based on the same thing. They were both geographically beautiful. The interesting thing was that the Croatians could also see the similarities, right? And so I became really interested in writing about this other conflict. What was the same and what were the key differences between the two? And I proposed this book to my publisher, and I guess I didn't really catch her blink when she did, but they commissioned it anyway, and I wrote it anyway. And then when the book came out, the world was astonished, absolutely astonished, that a black woman had written in the voice of a white man. Mm-hmm. It continues to astonish people, actually. You know, now with my students who have imbibed this idea that you can't write about anybody who doesn't look like you, I sometimes, you know, stop them in their tracks by saying, do you know I wrote a book in the voice of a white man? And they'll go, because that's not what they're expecting, right? They think this appropriation game is only going to work one way round, so, you know, it's like, well, hang on a minute, if we accuse them of culturally appropriating our stuff, are we going to have to accuse her of culturally appropriating Yugoslavs? And Yugoslavs don't seem to care, or the Croatians, as they, you know, and Slovenians and whatnot as they are now. So, you know, but to go to your question, let me say one more thing about that, which is, it took me quite a long time to get that book accepted onto African literature courses, right? And people kept saying, but it's not an African book. And I said, it's an African book. And they said, no, but it's set in Yugoslavia. I said, but I'm an African. It's an African book. I'm looking at a European war from the perspective of an African war. It's an African book. And so, in fact, it was Mukoma Wangugi was the first person to put it on an African literature course after this discussion. And it now is taught on African literature courses. But it's kind of interesting that the first thing was... And there was a sort of hilarious moment once where... I went into a bookshop and I can't remember where the book had been placed. Can't remember where it had been placed, but I said to the bookshop owner, that's not the right place for that book. And she picked it up, and I could see her looking at me and looking at the book and then going, where am I going to put this book? And she walked really, really slowly in towards the back of the room. And I thought, I'm just going to leave. I'm just going to leave and let her get on with it. And so when I went back into the store, they'd put it into New European Fiction. But and I'll let you speak Thai in a minute, because I know I'm going on. But to come to the second half of that question, how do I avoid stereotypes? I don't think I think in stereotypes, because I know the world is a bit more complicated and nuanced than that anyway. But, you know, we are all subject to our biases. It would be absurd to say we don't have them. I spend a lot of time where I'm going. I live the life of the person that I'm going to write about. And I had, with this particular book, to use it as an example, I had a lot of friends from Croatia, and, you know, they read my manuscript, and I spoke to them all the time about it. And before it went to the publishers, they all read it and had and were very happy with it. So I never really felt that was a particular worry and a trap, because I was a journalist once, and I know how to do my homework. But I also know, I guess, what the pitfalls of stereotype are, having been subject to them for so long.
Exactly. Thai.
Right. I think the question for me is, what is the project? Mm-hmm. So I'm fully aware that the world of publishing and the world of readers, influenced and informed by the former, struggle to accept African storytellers as observers of human experience. They can accept us as observers of our own human experience, ideally if it involves famine or a war.
Yeah.
But it's very difficult for them to understand that some of us are motivated by the desire to investigate the interior landscape of our characters. And so, your Croatian man was my middle-class African. It was as if I was writing about aliens. When I published Ghana Must Go, I was asked again and again to explain how I'd written about these Africans who didn't really seem familiar as African characters at the time, about 10 years ago. And I think in the beginning, like a very dutiful African daughter, I wanted to explain myself, and sort of assure everybody that I remember I said it again and again, it's interesting, I don't see Ghana Must Go principally as a novel about an African family, because it's about such a specific family in my mind that it sort of ends up being about family life and familyhood, what it is to be in a family. But to do that, one, I think, has to just confront, identify, and then resist the obligation to be a sociologist when you are, in fact, a novelist. I mean, I always say I write essays, and I've given a TED Talk, and all of it is faster and easier than writing a novel. If I wanted to make a sort of pithy sociological comment about anything, I don't think I would choose the form of the novel to do it. It's just a lot of labor. If that's what your project is, you can just write your New York Times op-ed and get on with it. But if you've decided to give years of your life to understand the experience of somebody who is not you, in theory, it's because you're looking for something. But I'll end by saying, Mercy, you ask about writing about people who are not like me, and I quote the writer who said, I contain multitudes. I am actually many, many people. My characters, old, young, man, woman, African, non-African, they're all like me. And I think that's true for most writers. We are plumbing the complexities of humanity, and there are very few characters I've ever written, whatever they look like, who don't feel in some way deeply familiar to me. So I do write about myself. I just write about all myself. And the one self that the world can recognize is the one they call an African woman.
Well, I'm not an essentialist, so when you say I'm writing about this particular family, they're not an African family, it's that particular family, I think that's it. No, when I say I write about a person who happens to live in Sierra Leone, I'm writing about a person who happens to live in Croatia, or I'm writing about a person who happens to be male, or I'm writing about a person who happens to be old, right? I'm writing about a person who happens to be those things, but those things are not the person.
Exactly. And you understand that to be true of yourself, foremost. And I think once you understand that, fundamentally, as a person or as a writer or both, it becomes facile to talk about your characters in terms of their demographics. This is what I mean. We're not demographers.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. You know, when Aminatta, you first spoke, you talked about how it took time for your book to be accepted in terms of, into like African literature. Yeah? Post-colonial Africa. I did a course called Post-colonial Africa about 4 years ago when I was doing my master's. And one thing that my lecturer really was asked about is the fact that she was teaching post-colonial Africa but could not access books by African writers or African writers in diaspora. We still used books written by people for us or Africans who are not really, Africans. And I know it's ironical. It's ironical because we keep
people who are not really Africans.
They are not Africans. Then? Like the people West, the white people. Somebody wrote a book about Africa, right?
Oh, yeah. Mercy, can I say that's the first time I've ever heard white people described as people who are not African, and that's what I'm going to now. Whenever I describe white people now, it's like people who are not African.
Okay, white people. None of them have African origin. And we have that discussion, right? And here we are talking about, again, appropriation. So do you think it's ironical that we are talking about having our literature or our writing accepted by other people, but still we are talking about doing away with books written by white people for Africans?
I'm strongly of the view that anyone can write anything. It's just as simple as that. The more narratives, the better. I'm not doing away with anybody's writing or work. Adding to the narratives, yes. Taking away narratives, no. Saying people can't write this or can't write that or shouldn't write this or shouldn't write that. Now, people do it badly and it's very irritating, right? We have a choice, which is we put the book down.
Yeah.
Right, but we don't say, you cannot do this.
So should we be having a question about narratives in terms of what we should consume in African schools, who it is written for? Should the bottom line be, as long as it is a good book, written well, then that's what matters?
But what else could the criteria be, other than it is well done and it is truthfully told? What other criteria could we judge a piece? Are we talking about just fiction here? And what other criteria can we judge? I think because nobody has ever asked whether, George R. Martin had the right to write in the voice of a hobbit. It's what we do. It's the job description. You pretend to be someone and something you're not. You go undercover. You infiltrate and you tell the story as if you were living in the world. And that's true if you were telling a story. If you're writing historical fiction, we know you are not from that time. If you are writing about anything, we don't expect it to be you. It's something that I find we ask uniquely of a certain type of writer. And I think to be honest with you, you said if it's done, fine. If it's done badly, less fine. But our resistance is to put the book down. I would also suggest that we can stop having the conversation. Should we just talk about something else?
The same way we should stop asking about narratives.
No, because, I write for TV, yeah? I write for TV and film, and I'm thinking about it. So the TV and film industry is still very North American-centric, and when foreign series first exploded on Netflix, there was this huge amazement on the part of American executives because they hadn't imagined that American viewers would embrace foreign content. Of course, once they saw that they did, money was thrown at it. But it was a complete revelation. Like, how is it possible that these American viewers love Casa de Papel? It's a Spanish series set in Madrid. Or Squid Games, it's Korean, it's in Korean. This was baffling. But anybody who loves a story should not be surprised to find out that readers, whether they're reading content on the screen or on the page, love a good story. This has always been true. So it's the industry. Yeah, it's what you said. The publishing industry is hopelessly balkanized. It's the marketing
people. They are
people.
not our friends.
They are not. They're obviously not good readers. No. They obviously know nothing about, they've never seen a child pick up a book about a pony. The child is not a pony. The child does not care.
Yeah.
We do not actually experience stories the way marketing tells us we do. And so I'm prepared. If you are you with me?
Yeah, I am with you.
Just
I am
stop
for
having
you
the
with
conversation.
You. Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
So there are young writers here. There are writers who really want to, spread their wings and write beyond the self. You are very established from where I sit. You've gone through the process. You cannot be pigeonholed right now. You know what it has taken for you to get here. What is your one advice? And I'm going to ask if there's anybody in the audience who has a question for them. I know our time is almost running out. What is your one advice to anybody sitting in this audience, young writer, coming up, trying to break through all the stereotypes, which you may not really think about right now, but it affects them because they're just coming up, they're just starting up, but they want to reach where you are and even be better than you. Maybe. What is one advice you would tell them?
Okay, I would give the piece of advice that most affected me. So I was told this by one writer, but it's also the same, almost exactly the same thing appears in Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet. And he says, go into the still of your night and ask yourself, must I write? Not, do I want to? Do I like it? Do I find it fun? Am I good at it? Is it a nice hobby? But must I write? And he says, if the answer be yes, then build your life according to this necessity. And when I read that, I got really excited about the building your life part. But it's really true that I think novelists should write novels only if they need to. It is a slow, difficult way to live a life. And if you have to do it, there's no other path. But I think it's important to try to find out which. To really know, is this something that I have to do in order to experience myself as myself in my time on earth? And for me, the answer was yes. It was obvious that the answer was yes when I was 4. It was obvious when I was 24. It was obvious when I was 34, when Ghana Must Go was published. So for some of us, blessed or cursed or both, this is the path. And to try to fight it will cause more suffering. But for those for whom it is not the path, trying to walk it can cause suffering too. And so I'm really honest that it is not really the easiest thing, and it's glorious if it's what you must do.
Yes, my advice would be do something else if you possibly can.
That's what I was trying to say nicely.
But to speak to this, it's quite funny. I teach creative writing every now and again, and I remember it's so rare you have someone in your class who can write, right? We always say, do you have anyone who can write? And you go, yeah, So I had this one student once, she was Kenyan in fact, and she could write. I was so happy. And I said to her, you must carry on. You've really got it. You must carry on. And I would see her from time to time. I would ask if she was writing. She wasn't writing. And I couldn't understand it. And then one day I was walking down the street in London. She said she lived in Kenya. So I was walking down the street in London. And I saw her. And then I saw her. And she was trying to hide. And so I went. She tried to hide right in the back of a bus stop. So I went round and I said, are you hiding from me? And she said, yes. And I said, because I'm going to ask you if you're writing, right? And she said, yes. And she wasn't. And I remember somebody saying to me, if she isn't, she never will, right? She has to. Writers need to write.
Exactly that.
Right.
And
she
you know,
can,
God
but
bless
she
her. God bless her.
Yeah,
She was
yeah.
probably living
Yeah,
a
yeah,
great,
she's
comfortable,
living a
stable
great
life
doing
behind that
something
bus.
else. I think she's designing things now. But anyway, my piece of advice is this. So a piece of advice that's given all the time is write what you know, right? You'll hear that all the time. Write what you know, which is probably how we've got into this particular kind of pigeonholing problem. But I don't think that at all. I say write not what you know, but what you want to understand. Because every book I've ever written has always started with a question, right? When I wrote The Devil That Danced on the Water, it was, how does a country implode? When I wrote The Hard Man, it was, how do you get a neighbour to kill another neighbour, right? When I wrote Happiness, it was, how do you go on living when really bad things have happened around you? So, you know, I've always had a question that I want to answer, and sometimes I don't really know what the question is until I'm about halfway through the book, or actually 2/3 of the way through the book. It takes quite a long time. What is it I'm trying to answer with this book? But that's what's always spurred me to start a book, to think of the characters that are going to embody that question, and then to try to answer the question over 300 pages and hopefully arrive at some kind of an answer. But that's what my advice would be. Write what you want to understand.
Thank you. Is there any, I have just seen the 15-minute notice going up. Is there anyone in the audience who has a question for either Aminatta or Taiye? There's a hand there. I don't know if there's a roving mic or I should hand this over. Is there a roving mic? Yes. Yes? There's a hand right there. And I know we may not be able to cover all the questions in these 10 or 15 minutes,
Right.
but both Aminatta and Taiye are here the whole day today.
Still here, yeah.
They're still here, so please find them if you have any pressing questions, and yeah, they'll get to answer them.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity. This is a question that I've actually asked a few authors, maybe in writing in text after reading the book, and I really appreciate that I've read Aminatta's work, and I really appreciate you as an author, and especially as an African woman who is not seen as such. My question is very general, and this goes to, I appreciate that you've said write what you want to understand, which is something that sounds very poetic when you say, but when it's now into the art of it itself, how do you, maybe if so first, after writing an experience, especially experiences that are not easily consumable, especially by the reader, if as a reader, it's very difficult to consume some material, in as much as it's very necessary to consume that, because if you don't, then you are so much far removed from the human aspect of it. How do you, I'm going to use the word, even though I'm not sure that's the experience of the writer, how do you heal from those experiences that are very difficult to consume, and especially because most of these experiences, you'd have to take yourself to the field and live those experiences. How do you remove yourself or heal from that before you even publish the book?
When I start a class, I tell my students, this is not therapy, and do not confuse it with therapy. You know, what you write might make it, if you have something in your background that you wish to write about, writing about it might make it worse, right? And so I've told that to every class, you know, don't confuse writing and therapy. Just because some therapists use writing as a way of therapy, don't confuse the two. And I have had one student leave a class and went off and got therapy and came back and said, thank you for that, right? She said, actually, I did think it was therapy, and I realized that that's what I wanted, and she went off and got therapy. So they are not the same thing, and therefore your question is somewhat unanswerable. But speaking about, you know, myself, I'll say that I had to really have sorted my shit out before I wrote, right? Forgive my French. You know, I had to have lived through it, thought about it, and worked it out before I wrote about it. You can't do it on the page, and that is not what the page is for, and that is not what someone who buys your book is paying for either, right? They're not paying to hear you go through your personal, your process, right, exactly. So, writing is ultimately a commercial activity, right? You are writing for
publishing
a
is a commercial activity.
Publishing is a commercial activity, forgive me, yeah. But you have to have that in mind when you write, and you have to be able to look at your work from the perspective of the reader who is going to come to it. But I do, when I'm teaching people, I do urge them to do whatever work they need to do in order to be able to write about that as a writer and not to mistake it for therapy and act out on the page.
What is your name? Okay, I'll ask you later. I wanted to say, Aminatta's question is the fundamental one. What do you want to understand? Or as another teacher of mine said, don't write what you know, write what you want to know. Yeah, write what you don't know, in a sense, but long to. But once you've decided what your question is, you've also got to make a decision about the form. Where will you tease out the answers? And I think it's an incredibly important thing to distinguish, because if you ask a writer, there aren't many, but there are writers who write both fiction and memoir. If you ask how that writer decides, which direction am I going to go in? Is this going to be autofiction or is this going to be memoir? Usually you'll find that the reason to write a novel is your subject will be what you wish to understand. That's your content. But you've got to make then a decision about form. And if you've decided that your form is a novel and not a memoir or morning pages, then you've made that decision because something in you is looking for a shape. You've decided that there's the information you want to find out. There's some truth in human experience that you are in pursuit of. But then also there is a shape, there's some kind of poetry that's pursuing you. And it's that, I think it's the twin impulses, the quest for understanding, but also for beauty that leads you to write a novel. And if you can resist those impulses and write nonfiction or something faster and more easily sellable, I would encourage you to do so. But if you can't, again, if you know that for some reason it's the form of the novel to which you are called, then you have to understand that you're not doing therapy anymore, right? You've moved past memoir, you've moved past confession, you've moved past your journal, and now you've decided to bring into the world something that has a shape, something that has music, something that is art. And you don't really need to heal from that, because art really does heal.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Taiye. Is there any other question? There's a hand here. Unfortunately, I'll only take maybe one more.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for your thoughts and reflections. I think one of the things that's been a takeaway from me from this conversation has been about kind of thinking and living and writing beyond limitations. And I'm curious about your processes and kind of the limitations that emerge within yourself, right? The doubt. Yes, there's the craft that's showing up for your work, but there's also the kind of endless march of thoughts. So how do you kind of maintain your kind of internal discipline, keep your eye on your vision, keep heart?
I was at a conference, a festival at which the same question was asked, and one of the writers said, "Why do you think so many writers are alcoholics?" Which was a little bit of a... There is a way to silence the march of thoughts, but the best, I mean, honestly, for me, it's meditation. That's what has to happen to clear away the debris. That's on a process point, a sort of day by day after the tea's been made and the stretches have been done sort of thing. But then the other biggest thing that I find challenging still now is telling myself that I have the right to tell this story. I know it was given to me. I know that for whatever reason, I've decided that it should take a shape and that it will be a novel. But throughout the process, I have to remind myself again and again that I am entitled to take this time, to take up this space, to give the months, days, and years of my life to this project, and that I qualify as a voice in the world. This does not come to me easily. I never pretend that it does. I was raised by incredibly intelligent and hardworking immigrants from Ghana and Nigeria who lived in Saudi Arabia and the United States, respectively. They're both now back in Ghana. They were very clear that they could claim the title doctor because they tested into it, right? They're both and they're both wonderful doctors, but there's something objective about becoming a doctor which doesn't exist when you become a writer. Nobody has ever been able to tell me that I just have the sufficient scores to get to do this job for the rest of my life. So I kind of have to tell myself every day. And I don't underestimate the importance of that. But because Aminatta doesn't believe in burden, and it shows, and I want skin like hers, I am now going to start casting off that burden as well. Yeah.
Aminatta, who doesn't believe in burdens?
Yeah, and there are those people who are burdens, and you want to stay away from them. Right? I mean, that's my advice. There are these negative people, and I really noticed it when I started writing, and you know, if I said what I did or I spoke about what I was writing, out they would come, you know, with all their little negativity. And I thought, oh, and I've learned to stay away from those people. You take your mojo, you treat it like an egg, like a little egg, and you keep it away from those people. And they will come at you with all their little kind of, you know, and it's their own doubt and their own problems and all of this, but they'll try to heap it on you, and you just got to bat them off and keep away from them. So, you know, when I first started out, I was very, very, very private about my writing. I had this horrible experience where, you see, I wrote 30,000 words of my first book, and then I decided that it would be a good idea to send it to a couple of people to read, for the reason that I'd read that another writer did this, and this would be a good idea, I think. So I did it. And one writer came back and said, yeah, this is great, on the right track, it's fine, you know, keep going. And the other writer came back and said, oh dear. Oh dear. Right. And told me all the reasons why this was terrible, why 30,000 words was terrible. And I was like, and, you know, I mean, it really did crack the shell of my mojo, right? I mean, I didn't know what to do. And I just had to take a great, big, deep breath and carry on, right? And I just decided, no, I know what I'm doing. I shouldn't have shown it to you. And I'm going to carry on. And I can tell you who's got the writing career now. But the other thing that happened, I mean, you know, forget that was bad enough, right? Around about the same time, one of my friends got an advance for $450,000 for a book. And that was also completely destabilizing, I can tell you, you know. And it was chick lit, right?
It wasn't a book about
it was chick lit. It wasn't a book about, African civil conflict.
Yeah.
And
it was a book about people who are not African.
Yeah, it was a book about people who are not African falling in love with other people who are not African. Jumping in and out of bed with people who are not African. So, you know, and that just felt like a real judgment. You know, hang on a minute, this is what she's going to get, and you know, and I'm putting my heart and soul into this thing that really, really matters to me, and it's not. So there's so many things that will try to that can destabilize you, and you've really just got to work very, very hard on thinking, I have to protect my mojo from all those things and all those people, and just keep my eye on the main prize. And it is a long game. It's a long game, right? It's not a one novel game, it's not a two novel game, it's not a three novel game. it's a long game, and you've got to, it's a marathon, right? Not a sprint, as they say.
I was at a conference once and I was signing my book for this person, and she said to me, "So this is all you do?"
Oh,
This-
wow.
I've literally just achieved my lifelong dream. It's my first novel. And I said, "I'm sorry, all you do is write? That's what you do?" I was like, "Say more." And she said, "Well, can you make a living off of this?" And I just remember being like, "Well, I'm alive, so let's see." But people do this, yeah?
Oh, look, my son does that to me.
Indeed so.
All you do is write books, mummy, he
Indeed
says.
so. Yeah, is that a business model? Yeah, you just, there's got to be, I love what you said about just the little egg. You just have to find your egg cup.
Great. Oh my goodness, there's a hand there. I'll just take one more question, okay? Just one more question and then I'll wrap it up. Yeah. Are there men in the audience? Gosh, all the questions. I'm just seeing ladies raising up their hands. Guys, come on. All right. Unfortunately, that's the last chance. There.
Hi, thank you. I'm such a great admirer of both you women, and I've read your books, and this is just awesome. It's not even enough time. The question I have is this. What do you think and what do you really love about your editors?
This is a trick question.
I know, not at all.
They
I
may
can-
be is
I
this
can answer
streamed
very
live?
quickly. I can
This
answer
is
very
streamed
quickly.
live. Be very careful about your
I
answers.
have
guys.
only one novel, and my editor is a dream. She was the editor I dreamed of. Absolutely wonderful. The kind of notes that she gave were so thoughtful and so honoring of my intention with the book. I mean, obviously she'd bought it, so it was sort of too late to go back. But I remember, for example, she told me, I'll never forget, she said, I reread your manuscript and I sent it to analysis. And I was like, is that a department at Penguin Random House, analysis? She said, yeah. And it came back from analysis. And I have to tell you, Taiye, you've used the word beautiful like 723 times. And I was like, do I use beautiful that much? And she's like, yeah, you might want to find some synonyms. But then she also said, but I think you should also become aware that you are very fascinated by...
Sorry.
Okay,
again.
no problem.
No problem.
And concerned with beauty. And she just gave me a lot of insight. So my actual editor at my publisher is a dream. My best editors, though, are two people that read everything I write, and they don't work for the publisher. They just, they are my trusted readers, the opposite of oh dear. So I always say to writers, you can find your best editors before you find your publisher, and you should.
I don't love all my editors. But the ones I do love, who are two in particular, what do I love about them? They can usually see what I can't see in the work. And that may mean that they see the story behind the story that I didn't necessarily know was there, but that I was telling anyway. And the very best editors, sometimes you get to a point with a piece of work where you can't. So here's a question I get asked all the time: how do you know when you're finished? And I go, you don't. But a good time to finish is when you're making it worse, not better.
That's a good time to stop.
That's a good time to stop, right? And hand it to your editor, right? Hand it to the editor that you love, and that editor that you love, or the editor that I love, is able to help me fix the things that I can have no longer found the way to fix. Right. And those are the editors I love.
Are you an editor? I thought so.
Yes, she's an editor. She wants to.
We know
she wants to be
writers.
better. I hope your writers speak like that about you. Anyway, good people, I think that brings us to the end of this conversation. Like I said, 45 minutes is never enough for us to tackle this theme, this topic, but I think we have covered something. I hope all of you have taken away a thing or two from...
Mercy, we didn't tackle the topic, we killed it.
Oh yes, we killed it. We killed it. And that was the goal when we walked on stage, right? That was the goal when we walked on stage. And I hope that you don't gate to have these questions asked wherever you go next, about, your identity and how to kill the stereotypes and the narratives and all that. But to the people who are in the audience who are aspiring writers, who are writing, I really hope you never get to be pigeonholed. You just fly and give it your very best and protect your mojo. Protect your mojo, and I think that applies to everyone, whether you're a writer or not. Protect your mojo. Surround yourself with the good vibes always.
Thank you very much, Mercy.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
very much as well.
Right.